Hi, welcome to another exciting episode of the Andre the Beast Creighton Show. Today, we're going to really talk about something that's real sensitive to me, and that's understanding our teenagers, our new world of teenagers, so to speak. Um, I read a book recently that really got to me, and I had to reach out to the author of this book to find out why it was written, what impacted this guide, because that's exactly what it is. I'd like to welcome all the way from the UK, author, publisher, therapist, behavior coach. The list goes on. I'd like to welcome Emer O'Donnell to the show. How you doing today?
I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Thank you so much. And before you ask me any questions, I want to just say one thing. I saw Sabrina Parr's interview with you, and she was fabulous. So I think anyone, before they listen to me, should go back and listen to her.
Really? I would let I would let her know, and thank you so much. Yeah, she was a very interesting uh person. I mean, it's an old saying, um, walk in my shoes before you judge the story. And her story was really impactful. I think we probably could have did another hour because her journey from start to finish to where she's at now is truly remarkable. And I was very privileged to have her on the show. But let's
Thank you.
talk about, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Let's talk about you. Your book, it should be a bestseller. It's a guide. Tell us a little bit about who you are before we get into the book, the name of the book, and so forth. Let's talk a little bit about who you are.
Okay. So I was brought up on the west coast of Ireland, and actually, that's a place where so many Irish have gone to America many, many, many years ago over the centuries. So
Okay.
a lot of my forefathers came from there, and brought up by my mother. I have two older brothers. My father was an alcoholic, unfortunately, and wasn't around. And she also had the help of my granddad to help us as well. Um, we didn't have much, but my mother was an incredible woman. She was what I would call the good adult that most families need. And she was the sort of parent that would have everyone else's kids around, especially during those teenage years when they fell out of with their own parents.
Right.
So I feel very, very blessed. And I think if we can get that sort of family love and support um, going, it has a tremendous impact on children. So a lot of love, not a lot of money. I was probably the first in my family to go to university. I studied psychology. I was one of those kids that traveled around the country with my mother when she worked because she would do anything. She'd turn her hand to anything to make sure there was food on the table and a
Really?
roof over our heads.
You
And
mentioned, hold on a minute, hold on a little. You mentioned your dad wasn't there. Did that affect you at all and your mom? Because three kids and your mom doing any and everything and to put food on the table. What was that like without having your dad there, knowing that your dad had that's a illness? I don't like calling it alcoholism. He had an illness.
well, I mean, the last time I had seen my dad was when I was two. So he'd left and he'd gone moved to England. My
Okay,
mother lived in Ireland, so he left. And I suppose at that age you really don't know any different.
right.
I had an older brother who I used to kind of treat like my dad.
Okay.
We were a very close family, we were a family that, loved each other and we talked things through. And so in a way, I suppose you don't miss what you don't have. And
Good
and
answer.
and and I think maybe it's when you get older as a young woman that your father teaches you things about the world that maybe I didn't learn
Right.
in terms of kind of relationships and stuff like that. So I suppose unconsciously it may have affected, but I wasn't aware of it growing up, to be
Okay.
honest with
So back to your mom. Your mom was the Emerald Isle. She kept everything together. You learned from your mom. You was going places with her. Then what? Then what else? How else did your mom impact your life?
Well, when I used to travel with her when I was quite young, I'd go to a local school for a day and, maybe spend 3 days there and then move on and go to another one. So I learned when I was traveling with her that if I was quiet, I'd be able to stay with her much more than if I was really noisy and didn't behave. And I guess what that taught me when it came to me deciding what I was going to do many, many years later in terms of kind of further education, psychology seemed like a natural thing for me to do because I was fascinated by how people behaved. And as a young girl, I used to just sit there and watch behavior and always be curious about why people did what they did.
What
So
was an
that's why I ended
example?
up
What
doing
was an
what I wanted.
example of some of the, because that is kind of strange. Most people that get into that field is really fascinated. But what I don't hear somebody ask them is, what are some of the things that made you fascinated about people? What were some of the characteristics that they were doing? And did the characteristics differ from race, races of people, like the way they acted, the way that they did things? Like, what were some of the schemes that made you say, this is really what I want to get into?
I think we had quite a busy household. You know, people would come and go. My mum
Okay.
has ended up traveling around the world with her work subsequently to trying to put food on the table. And so for me, it's seeing different cultures. It's seeing
Right.
how, you know, different beliefs impact people's behavior about being able to show up as who you truly are.
Mhm.
That you putting a face on it, some people being performers, some people being much, you know, quieter and reserved and not having that confidence. I think I just saw a whole barrage of all of this when I was a young child, and I was just really curious. And it
Right.
just, you know, I don't think I even realized it at the time, but when it came to the point that, you know, when I'd finished my education and what am I going to do at university, it
Mhm.
seemed like, oh well, psychology seems pretty obvious, so I should go and do that.
Where did you see yourself in the bigger scheme of things? Because that's a pretty tight field, because you really have to be in tune with all different cultures, the male and the female, but something led you to more focusing on children. Why is that?
Okay. So if I think I went to university, I did psychology, I came out of the end of it, actually, what I wanted to do is work in business. So that kind of changed. And
Right,
I was lucky to work in business internationally for over 25 years with the businesses that I worked in. A lot of them were newspapers, magazines, when they used to be on the newsstand and they were printed around the world, as opposed to being on our digital devices.
right.
So for me, what I really, really discovered is that I got married, um, and that didn't work out. I kind of reckoned very quickly that it wasn't going to work out. And I was in my 30s, and I had a small baby, you know, year and a half year old little boy. And I thought, how did I get here? You know, and it just made me realize that we can drift in our lives and we don't really have a full sense of purpose or a full sense or a mission in the way that I love Sabrina did. You know, her focus on her dreams rather than on her fears. That was the beautiful thing about her story,
Right.
is that I really felt that I didn't have that focus. I guess I just wanted the happy family and I hadn't really thought about that. But I was looking for something beyond myself to fill a vacuum. And I've subsequently learned we're complete, absolutely complete, but it depends on the story that we have and the beliefs that we have and that we carry. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's based on the experience we have. You know, if we have, you know, relationships that hurt us, we can be frightened to really truly love again. And so for me, what happened was I left a marriage with my 1.5-year-old son, and I had to I had to survive. It's like I was recreating something that my mother had to do that I never wanted.
Right.
And I think that's where I realized during those times was stress is not going to be my best friend as a mother. I
Wow.
had to make changes in my life, in terms of my work because I couldn't travel in the way I used to. And I was very clear about, I went to go and work for a race team and moved out of London into the countryside. And I discovered not long after that the race team was about to go bankrupt. And I was like, oh my God, what do I do now? And I was running around like a headless chicken. But I looked at the racing drivers and they weren't.
Mm.
And I'm thinking, what is it that they were doing that I wasn't doing?
Mhm.
And sorry?
No, I said, yeah, I'm listening.
And what I discovered was, and this is 25 years ago, where poor people were thinking about living presently or having a winning mindset or any of that. I watched them and they lived from one race to the other. They were living presently. They were very focused. They were very intent on what they wanted to create, and they didn't indulge their fears. And they also found joy in their everyday, which I think is something that we lose today because we're so fearful that we can't do X. There's so much pressures that people are losing the joy. And so for me, that whole of experience of raising my son, you know, working whereby I chose to be really intentional about that I wasn't going to, not spend time with him. So I negotiated 25 years ago to be able to work from home and
Mhm.
also just have to go into a city job 1 day a week or 2 days a week. And living with the uncertainty of that, because initially I just got a profile, I just got a contract for 3 months. And I thought I can be scared about the fact that it's 3 months, or I can focus on the fact and be grateful for the 3 months and just see where it takes me. And
Mhm.
that ended up lasting for a year. And then from the back of that, someone else approached me to go and work for them, but they totally tailored a job around what I did. And I stayed working for that company for over 11 years because it enabled me to balance my professional life, my family life, and being able to be sure I was able to maintain my well-being, which absolutely underpins our performance.
Did you
And
have you mentioned that you left the marriage? You left the marriage. So this was both of you guys' first child, correct?
mhm,
Where was he at during all of this? I mean, was the relationship, was the marriage that toxic that could you go to him for for support, somebody to lean on? You this is you guys' first child. You're trying to let's call it what it is. You're trying to manifest a beautiful world, not like what you saw your mom going through. Was there any support for you during this first stage of your journey?
okay, so he did see his son because it was very, very, very important to me for him to see his son.
Mhm.
He used to see him every second weekend because I
Okay.
had an experience of not having a father. And into my
Okay.
30s, I think that's when I realized that it did have an impact. And
Right.
so I had an absolute mission that the relationship my son should have a relation, our son should have a relationship with his father. But it wasn't an easy one at
You
all.
said you said now you realize the absence of your father. What was that particular point and what was that like that now this is starting to recircle again? You seeing yourself becoming your mom, you seeing the absence of a father. How do you take that and put it in reverse the polarity of a negative force and make it into a positive so it doesn't further impact you moving further in your journey?
I mean, I think I've done enough work on myself now over
Mhm.
the years that I know how things operate in a way much more consciously than I
Mhm.
would have ever done before.
Mhm.
Because I think so many of us don't realize that, we get we get we get access to it like 11 million bits of information every second into our unconscious minds, but we can only process 40 to 50 per second. So that's a whole pile of information that we're missing out on if we're not aware of how our patterns of thinking are, what our stories are, what our
Mhm.
beliefs are, how we handle things like mental resistance, where we get stuck in a comfort zone that can often end up being uncomfortable. So
Mhm.
for me, what I try and do with my work is I want to educate this generation in terms of knowing all this stuff. So you don't become a victim to it. So you can stand in your greatness rather than your victim.
Mhm.
And I also know for young people, because there's such a high rate of suicide, that one of the most important factors for them, the research shows it, is that they have a good adult in their lives. And
Okay.
what a good adult is someone that they can talk to, someone that they can trust, someone that they feel is not going to judge them, someone that they feel safe with. And what we know is that reduces the amount of depression, self-harm, and suicide. And so
Mm.
for me, what I want to be teaching is, yes, my father being around did impact me, but what I've learned subsequently is if you just have a good adult and not, another good adult or a male adult in your life, doesn't have to be a father, and your mother, because the mother often influences those early years more than in the teen years is often where you want a father figure. And that's what we know from the research. And if you can learn that actually, you are complete, you are unique, there's no one else like you, there isn't a vacuum to be filled. You just need to go and find a purpose and be aligned with that and discover for a reason why you're here. That's a much more powerful thing to be able to drive forward. And so I guess that's what I take through my work when I work with young people, or whether I train other coaches, or I'm working in a football club at the moment in the UK, and just training other coaches. If you can teach these skills that do not get taught in mainline education, then that can be phenomenally empowering for young people when they're going through what I call almost a second life, a second chance,
Mhm.
where their brains are um, they're being rewired. They're trying to discover who they are. And if you can give them these valuable lessons, that they have everything they need and not to be triggered by their externals all the time, and to be able to focus and put their energy into creating what they want rather than running away from what they're fearful of,
When did
that
you
can
decide?
transform your life.
When did you decide to actually start focusing your attention on children? Because you started out dealing with pretty much more of an adult environment. What when did you decide to really take your attention and focus it more on uh um showing kids how to get into a state of empowerment? But what part of that changed, and when did you get into that?
Okay, so
Mm.
as I said, I'd worked for that other company for 11 years, and then I wanted to have more children. So I had two more. So I have a 27-year-old and I have a 9 and an 11-year-old.
Mhm.
And what I did was, at that point, I had two more children, and I went and did a master's at a place called Henley Business School in the UK, where I did a master's in behavioral change. And I came out of the back of that thinking, this stuff is so transformational. I thought I was aware with the psychology, but actually it doesn't even touch the sides with what I've learned here. And I had a 3-year journey doing that. And I just thought, why don't we teach it to young people? They need it more than ever. We get more data in a day now than a person got in their whole life in the 1900s. And our brains have not evolved to cope with it. So we're
Let me ask a
constantly.
question real quick. I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm trying to really put my mind around this in the book as well, which we'll talk the name of the book and so forth. But here at one point of your life, you see yourself in the same situation as your mom. You're following your mom's footsteps. You're coming in and out. But this is and you're focusing more on kids. But the question here is, wasn't based on what just happened with the first child, was there fear, or was your mind developed enough in your method that we're getting ready to talk about, clairvoyant enough to have two more children, or even want two more children? Does that make any sense what I'm trying to say? Like, you went through one with, basically I call that the trial error. It didn't work out, blah, blah, blah. You're trying to bring the father into the forum because you didn't have your father, but now you have two more children. Is it what's different between the two? Was there a learning curve that you took from that child into these two children, or are you still trying to figure the combination to all this?
Um, I think my first child and the fact that separated was a big learn for me, because what it
Okay.
taught me is that I'm capable of so much more than I ever thought.
Okay.
And I'm always blessed to my mother that she taught me that you don't have to stay in what's accepted socially. Um, you can go and recreate something different. And so she
Mhm.
gave me the strength to know that I could also raise a child on my own if I have to. But I knew I had to change things in my life in order to do that properly.
What
So
were the
that was
things
really important.
what were the things you had to change in your life in order to make sure that not only the first child, but the next two, as well as yourself, create what you're trying to create?
I think it's a lot of it is to do with that work-life balance. I think so many people spend, there's nothing wrong with work, but when it comes to the point that you don't see your children, or you're constantly stressed, or you're constantly anxious, or you're constantly worried, if you bring that into that home environment, it has a knock-on effect. And it's
Mhm.
not a positive effect, because it doesn't affect you in a good way in terms of how you deliver your behavior, how you get triggered, how you may, go for a bottle of wine every night, or you take drugs, or, we know in the UK that 25% of the UK adult population are currently being prescribed a psychiatric drug. So that tells me that people are not coping in the society we're living in right now. And so
Mhm.
for me, just knowing that you have to get an element of balance, I think that was a big learn for me. I had to give up a job that I loved and recreate something else in order to be able to deliver that balance and still put food on the table.
Did you
So
find
I
that
learned that 25 years ago.
did you find through your research and dealing with individuals, both overseas and abroad, both US soil, abroad soil, um, are you finding that most parents, whereas it relates to creating that environment for our kids or creating an environment for kids in general, um, this is more widespread than what we could have ever imagined?
Absolutely. I think COVID really pushed things for a lot of people, because the uncertainty, I think we live in a world that's ever changing, it's constantly evolving. As a human race, we like certainty, and we're
Mhm.
not getting it. I think if you look at the media feeds that we have on our phone every day, it's selling us fear. And when we operate from a place of fear, we make really poor decisions.
Mm.
And when we make poor decisions, we create bad outcomes. And they might be small little decisions, but ultimately they'll accumulate in something that is in landing us in a place where we don't want to be.
Mm.
So it can be simply as, being scared about your children, sending them out. We don't, I don't know about where you are in the US, but we don't have children running around the streets anymore, laughing and playing in the way that we used to, because we're too scared to let them out. So from a very young age, they're learning fear.
Mm.
And that's not the place they should be, because that's a really low energy emotional it's vibrating at a really low energy, that emotion. And we know that emotions can be measured scientifically. So
Okay.
if we're stuck in fear, if we're stuck in shame, if we're stuck in guilt, if we're stuck in pride, and we want to be in, love, empowerment, reason, logic, all those things that can really help us make good decisions, we can't, if we're stuck in the lower energy ones, we can't go to the top ones. And the route to that is being able to stand in courage. And a really important question to ask ourselves is, what's the step I need to take right now? Am I coming from a place of fear? Am I coming from a place of love? And what next action do I need to take from a place of courage?
Wow. Let's talk about, before we wrap up, let's talk about the most important part of this journey, which is the final conclusion. You actually took your experiences um, as a child going into adult with your children, and you created a bestseller, Understanding um, Team Stress and Anxieties, the Coach. Tell us a little bit about the book, the name of the book, show us the book, and tell me why create the book? What was the purpose of it? And what's that book supposed to do to help educate and empower us to go to a higher vibration so we can help our children evolve to create the manifestations that they so have the ability to do?
Yeah. So I will try and show you the book, but I know it's Zoom. It doesn't always work, but there it is. So that's it. So the reason I created the book is because I said I work with a lot of teens, and I also work with other coaches to train them in what I do. And what I discovered was, people say it's the kids' fault. And then I discovered it's not always the kids' fault because it takes two to tango.
Mhm.
And the family is the first, diverse system we're part of because we're all different. So what I discovered was I ended up talking to a lot of parents and they were asking me about what to do. And I thought, well, what do I do to create that bond with a young person when they come to me and I'm a stranger? So I went and I had a look and I put loads of tools and techniques in there in terms of, what our bad day behavior is, because we all have one, understanding it and how to navigate it, understanding the landscape that young people are in now, because a lot of parents haven't lived through that. And so they don't really understand it. So setting that scene,
Mhm.
also asking parents, what do you want from your kid? Because often what you say you want and the way you behave means you get a different result from the one you do want.
Right.
And so it also takes parents on a coaching journey. So we look at things like um, connection blockers with young people, why they won't talk to you. Look at active listening because we don't listen very well in a world that we're all too busy running around like headless chickens. Um, you look at things like feedback and the science behind feedback because we can get stuck in a story with a relationship that can consume half our days, and especially if you're a teenager, that's a really difficult thing for you.
Mhm.
I look at the teenage brain and how it works and how it shows up, and I also look at something that's super important, which is our story and the fact that we make up stories. We are prone to prejudice, we're prone to thinking errors, we're prone to biases. And when it gets out of hand, again, we create the opposite of what we want. And if I use one story, and I actually put it in the book, it's George Perry Floyd Jr.
Yeah.
That's the most awful story whereby the police officers involved in his life have their prejudice, they have their past experiences, they're connecting their brain filter in a way that does not work properly because our brain filters are not always accurate and we need to be able to challenge them. And as a result of the way that they decided the story was unfolding and not being able to listen and come from a place of humanity and love, because they were operating from a place of fear, the consequences of those actions and that story and that thinking and the way they connected that dots, not based on reality, but
Mm.
based on illusion, had terrible consequences. And so for me, if we can teach this next population that need to live in truth, we need to seek the truth. We need to know that as humans, we don't always behave and we can struggle to be objective, but you need to be able to challenge all that stuff. You need to be able to challenge your assumptions. You need to be able to challenge the fact that you delete information to suit yourself. You know, if we can bring that education, which I have done in the book for parents, so they know why they don't get the results they want, if we can bring that into mainstream education, then I think we could have a different world because we need to be able to stand in each other's shoes.
You mentioned something. This is a two-part question. I understand the book is a guide to help the parents, but you got two-part. That George Floyd thing did make sense because that police officer, the law enforcement, had been trained to understand generational trauma, first of all, because evidently when the fear set in, he reacted on generational trauma combined with fear that comes from being in the law enforcement agency and not knowing what's about to happen. But with your book, this is something that I don't know if you've encountered, but is your book capable of dealing with the parent that is uncoachable, the parent that has trauma, who may be narcissistic, who may have unforeseen trauma in their own life that they can't recognize themselves? How was that book going to be able to help them be better parents if they can't recognize that they have their own trauma? Does that make any sense?
Perfect sense. I can't fix the world. And I absolutely believe that we operate in a vibrational way that when that book is supposed to come into your life, you can pick it up.
Hmm.
I also believe that the book is not just for parents, but it's also for coaches or other people who can work with young people. And if they can become the good adult that the parent that they have is not able to be, then for me, that's a win-win. Because if we have more good adults in the world, we have a lot less depression, self-harm, and suicide in young people.
How
But
can
there are
the
skills that need to be learned in order for that to happen.
how can the viewers get in contact with you, get a copy of the book, and then once again, give us the name of the book as well as showing the book because you showed it down real quick. We didn't get a chance to see the book.
Oh, I'm trying to get it. I'm just trying to get it to work. Hold on. There we go. No, oh,
There we go. Go back a little bit. This
there
there
we
we
go. We
go.
got
Perfect.
it. Okay, there's the book.
Okay.
So it's available on Amazon worldwide, and it's called Understanding Teen Stress and Anxiety: A Parent's Guide to Building Love and Connection. And I'm available at www.teenreconnect.com /Emer, EMERODONNELL.
Emer, you definitely are a blessing. I like the way you said that you can't cure the whole world, but at least you're doing it one person at a time based on your experience and trying to make a difference. I ask the viewers to please get this book, use it. If you know somebody that wants the book, give it to them as a gift so we can show the children of the future that they do have the power to create a totally different universe, a universe filled with peace, unconditional love, change the vibration that we currently are in. Basically, find the stones. This is one of the stones that we need to put in that arsenal. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another exciting episode of the Andre the Beast Creighton Show.